Thanks, Grant, for the introduction and good morning, everyone. This morning, Craig and I would just like to share with you some research we've been doing on COVID-19 and our thoughts on how it's going to impact brands and so therefore, for many of you, your clients over the coming months. So obviously, what's been going on around the world has impacted all of us in different ways. Sadly, sometimes in tragic ways. But even though we can kind of see the visible signs of what's going on around us, it can be difficult to appreciate just how big the impact has been and I think will be as well. I mean, just a sort of one indicator of that, I think, which has kind of received quite a lot of publicity in Thailand, is the impact on tourism. Tourism represents 20% of Thailand's economy, so it's really very important to people's livelihoods and their jobs. And 2/3 of that economic impact comes from international tourists, who have effectively that kind of has therefore dropped to zero and is going to remain at pretty close to zero, I think, for some time. So a huge impact on people's lives. And so the question is, while we're very familiar and with the kind of immediate impact, what does this really mean in the long term? And Craig and I are going to focus on kind of 7 themes, but they fall into 3 areas. So we're firstly going to talk about the fundamentals of branding. Then we're going to move on to think about some of the new need states that have been emerging. And then finally, talk about a couple of aspects of customer experience and how that is changing. And I need to acknowledge that this isn't our work alone, but it's based on a huge piece of desk research that was kicked off in March by some very good colleagues of mine called Beyond Research, based in Milan in Italy. And of course, they were one of the early victims of the pandemic. And it's covered 17 different countries, including China, Singapore, and Thailand, which is going to be our focus today. So let's kick off by thinking about some of the fundamentals of branding, and specifically corporate responsibility and brand purpose, and how that needs to be, I think, reset and rethought by businesses. I mean, as Warren Buffett kind of wisely said, when times get tough, it really exposes businesses for who they are, for people for who they are. And we've seen that in the responses of different companies to the pandemic. Some have been fantastic. They've supported their staff, supported their customers, supported their other business stakeholders. And then there are others who basically sort of revealed that they were kind of naked all the time. And it's a basic kind of human truth that first of all, trust is a really basic and strong kind of human motivation. But the flip side of that is that we all instinctively dislike it when we see people acting in ways that we perceive to be unfair or taking advantage. And several companies during the pandemic have really kind of been quite opportunistic in the way that they've approached their businesses. One of the kind of earlier victims were some of the food delivery companies that was sort of seen to be price gouging and exploiting sort of both the delivery drivers and the restaurants as sort of their end customers, as it were. And I think there's been quite an interesting response to that. I don't want to get into the sort of too much into the ethics of what they're doing, but in my experience is quite a lot of people have started calling restaurants directly to sort of talk to them, talk about what they need, and work out directly how that can be delivered to them. And it's quite interesting. I've read some great quotes from some of the owners of restaurants, and one of the things they point out, apart from the sort of the fairness of dealing directly, is just that actually that in a sense is also a more human way to get the sort of food delivery that you need without kind of hiding behind your mobile phone. And that's kind of interestingly touches on a couple of the themes we're going to talk about later. The truth is that this is not just kind of like fluffy, nice to do stuff, but the Edelman Trust Barometer, which came out this year, actually shows some data that suggests that it's something that people do care about a lot, and they act on too. So in their latest report, they say that ethical considerations actually count up to 3 times more than competence in terms of how they rate their trust with businesses. And a subsequent report that Edelman done, which looks at the impact of COVID itself, they reported that 1 in 3 people they spoke to had recommended to a friend not to use a business, not to use a brand, because of the way they'd behaved during the pandemic, which they've considered to be sort of inappropriate. Now that's kind of a big red flag, I think, for brands' behavior, because brands and the business they build is all about trust. And ultimately that trust comes from not only expressing particular values, but by living by those values and being seen to be consistent and credible in what you do. So kind of our takeout on this is that brands really need to be thinking and reflecting on their core values and sort of judging how relevant are they today. They may have been relevant sort of pre-COVID, but have things changed? Do they need to think about is the value relevant in itself, or do they sort of need to adjust the way they think about it to make it fit better with the sort of the current times and the way things are going to develop over the coming weeks and months? Of course, they need to continue to act on their values in a consistent way. And it's pretty clear from a lot of research that things like transparency and authenticity have become more important. And I would add to that, I think what matters really most, and the brands that have done best during the pandemic are the ones that have provided very specific and practical help to people in what are, let's face it, very challenging times. So with that, let me hand over to Craig to talk about our next topic.
Thanks very much, Neil. So our second topic is about sustainability redefined. Now, of course, sustainability has been a very hot topic for several years now and a key focus for a lot of businesses. But as I'm going to share with you shortly, I think the definition of sustainability and what it means in today's world in the middle of a pandemic is fundamentally changing. Before we get into that, let me share what I think is quite a heartwarming story. Some of you may have already heard of it. And it's a story that happened in Thailand while we were in the midst of lockdown and, of course, stopping our usual activities. We weren't able to go to beaches and such forth. That gave a chance for some rare lockerhead turtles to return en masse to Thai beaches to lay their eggs. This was a really nice story, not just in itself, but because it just reminded us that what is possible when we actually change, when us humans change our behaviour, and we're willing to, to share to coexist with other species. And I think this is increasingly an important topic. Now, we were warned back in June. This is taken from BBC News, but you may have seen something similar. We were warned very much that unless we learn to change our ways, unless we learn to share our space with other species in a proper and sustainable way, we're going to face similar issues to coronavirus moving forward. We're going to have more pandemics and perhaps even worse pandemics. So I think there's a real wake-up call for us to change our ways, for those of us that haven't, to really reflect on this and change our ways. Now, of course, it's not easy for us to change our behaviours, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. And as these news stories highlight, there's been a huge increase in the amount of plastic waste. And it's quite easy to understand why. As we've stayed at home more and ordered more food, as we wear our masks and other personal protective equipment, most of which is disposable, we increase the amount of environmental pollution, plastic pollution. So this is really a challenge that we see moving forward, a tough one. It's hard for us humans to change our behaviour, particularly when we're very focused in the middle of a pandemic on our own safety needs. Now, Thailand's done very well in terms of managing the pandemic so far, with relatively few deaths and cases. But that doesn't mean to say the impact isn't great here, as Neil mentioned in the beginning. And actually, many economic analysts have pointed out that they expect that Thailand will suffer the most in Asia, not because of the number of deaths and cases here, but because of its reliance on international trade, particularly tourism as well. So obviously hugely dependent on tourism. Certain provinces and islands have a massive reliance on tourism. So this is obviously going to affect millions and millions of people, push them under the poverty line. So really, we have to start thinking about sustainability, not just in terms of our planet, but it's the sustainability of our society and of our economy. And this is an issue for any country, but particularly a country like Thailand, where it's so reliant on international trade. And perhaps what we're seeing now is a bit of a reflection. Do we want to be so reliant on tourism and trade? Should we be more self-reliant moving forward? And certain noises from the government at the moment around tourism and the future of tourism suggest that there is some deep reflection and perhaps a move towards greater self-resilience. So just to recap why this matters, we see the strong interdependency now, but there are noises happening from government that suggest perhaps a greater economic self-reliance, less reliance on international trade and tourism. We're obviously going to see a huge amount of vulnerable people in society, and I think we can and should expect more from brands in terms of the impact they have to society. So I think this term net positive impact is going to be a very important term for brands moving forward. And fundamentally, brands need to be thinking around longer term business models that incorporate sustainability principles which are refined for the new age that we live in. Now, our third theme we call simple pleasures, and this reflects some of our refocusing that we've done during lockdown, the fact that we've had many of our normal distractions and entertainment taken away from us, and we've had to return to simple pleasures, but also a reflection that during this time we've really thought deeply about what's important in life. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, certainly during most of our lives individually, we would have what's called a dark night of the soul. So we might face a personal crisis that pushes us to go inside, to be introspective, and to really think about what's important in our lives. I think really what we're doing is a kind of soul searching on a collective basis in society now, as we're faced with something very serious that threatens our society. Now, we had, obviously in Thailand, we were not as impacted in terms of lockdown as many countries, either in terms of the severity or the length of the lockdown, but we still had a significant period where our homes became the focal point of our lives. And this helped us to really sort of think about what's important, but also it made us really look for the simple pleasures in life as some of our choices were taken away. So many of us spent more time with family, were able to perhaps cook together, do things like baking, or perhaps have a garden, or as many of us in Bangkok don't have gardens, have at least a home balcony. So there's a real sense of what are the small pleasures that we can enjoy in life. And also the language of the pandemic is really interesting. We often hear the expressions of essential and non-essential work and workers. And for many of us, this often makes us think about whether what we do is really important and who are doing the really important jobs in society. And of course, during a pandemic, it's very clear that we've got real heroes there, the doctors and the nurses that are saving our lives and putting their own lives at risk. But of course, there's a number of other unsung heroes, particularly when we were faced with lockdown, the delivery drivers that were bringing us our food, the retail assistants that were working to stay open during the lockdown period, a number of different people that were really important to having some sense of continuity in our lives. And at the same time, perhaps we reflect on whether some of the superficial identities, the aspirations of celebrities are really relevant during this kind of time. So why does this matter? A lot of brand communications, of course, address our aspirations, but really at a time when we have a major pandemic, our aspirations are really changing. So brands need to adapt to our current moods and mindsets. I think even though many of us are suffering and struggling in one way or another because of the economic hardship, perhaps the fear of losing jobs, or being able to prevent to do what we normally can do, we still, as humans, innately need to feel a sense of progress, even in challenging times. And I think this is where brands can really be creative in helping people to feel that sense of progress. And of course, with uncertain futures, maybe our aspirations have to take a bit of a backseat and we need to find more joy in the moment. So if you're working for a brand, what can your brand do to bring fun and joy to people's lives? Now, the fourth theme I want to share with you is all about health. And of course, health is on everyone's mind in the middle of a pandemic. But we want to talk about health in more holistic terms, meaning a more general sense of health and well-being that everyone really is struggling with at one level or another. And I think every brand now, we like to say every brand is now a healthcare brand, because in one way or another, brands can help people with either their physical or their psychological, emotional, and mental healthcare needs at this point in time. Now, of course, the first health need that brands need to be aware of is the need to keep their customers safe. And we've all had experiences of going out since lockdown finished, to restaurants, to shopping centres, and we've seen the various ways that businesses have very diligently protected our safety and reassured us through such things as contactless payment as well, so sometimes involving some innovation, which again we'll talk about later. Now, with our increased focus on hygiene, if you are a brand that is in a category where hygiene is important, so that could be personal care or household care, then it's perhaps a good time to look at how meanings of hygiene are actually changing. And we've actually done a piece of work on this for a specific client. And, you know, I think the reason this is important for clients to do is, first of all, there are new innovation opportunities that can come about through having an increased focus on hygiene. But secondly, even in terms of brand communication, packaging and communication, it's important that brands reflect current meanings around hygiene, up-to-date meanings, so that they stay relevant during this time where hygiene meanings are changing significantly. COVID-19 has taught us that actually those that have sadly died generally have an underlying health condition. So I think for many of us, this has given us a new focus on our own health to make sure that if we do come into contact with the virus, we're in the best possible shape, that our immune system can act as the last line of defense. Now, at the moment, there's no local transmission, but with borders opening in future and perhaps more travel, it's hard to imagine it will stay that way. So I think there's huge opportunities for brands here that are targeting certain underlying sort of foundational health benefits, such as immune health or gut health, or indeed heart health. All of those are likely to be very attractive to people at this point in time. We shouldn't forget, of course, the silent pandemic that's taking place. With less than 60 deaths in Thailand, a lot of the suffering has been the psychological impact, firstly of the lockdown, but now the biggest impact will be the economic impact and the suffering that's going to cause. And again, there are opportunities for brands here to help, to deliver products and services that address anxiety, to help people with their sleep, that help people enhance their mood, focus them on their work, and perhaps improve their energy as well. So again, lots of innovation opportunities for brands to help, sincerely help people during this time. So why does this matter? Again, if we look at health in more general holistic terms, every brand now is a healthcare brand that can be doing something. And that means there's many opportunities for brands to innovate, to address emerging physical and emotional and mental health needs that people have. And as new meanings around health and hygiene emerge, as well as innovation, there are also opportunities to adjust communication to be more relevant in our current lives in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm now going to hand over to Neil again.
So our fifth theme is, and thanks, Craig, our fifth theme is the sort of this kind of COVID crisis is a very global crisis, impacting trade around the world, travel, as we've talked about, global supply chains have been disrupted. But it's pretty clear that all the best solutions are much more local in nature, be that at a sort of country or a city level, or even at the level of kind of small local communities. And I think the last few months has really made all of us appreciate that importance of local connection and the community that we live in. And this has come to the fore in Thailand, perhaps more than most places. And a really good example of the community kind of all rallying around to help each other is the Pantry of Sharing, which is an initiative I'm sure many of you will have heard about, which started, I think, in Bangkok, but spread all around Thailand, even spread to downstairs from where I live. And the basic idea is very simple, that people who can afford to help stock up pantries with non-perishable food items and with basic hygiene, and then those who are in need are encouraged to come and take what they need to help them get through these difficult times. And I think that this kind of initiative is something that can really help local brands strengthen their community ties, and that could be from very small, mom and pop businesses through to the example on the screen now, which is Top Supermarket Initiative, where they're working to support local Thai farmers to help them sell their summer fruit and produce, and making sure that they have guaranteed prices for that as well, so that they're receiving sufficient income to survive and kind of make the work that they do worthwhile. And interestingly, this kind of idea of local communities and focusing on local farmers, local producers, local artisans is something that came out very strongly in the global work that we did. So kind of from France to Australia and Thailand, in between, it's something we see everybody doing all around the world. That's sort of, and I think that's obviously driven by the fact that we've all been kind of wedded to our local communities. It's really made us appreciate them so much more. And specifically in Thailand, I think this is also being kind of helped, and we'll talk about this a little bit more shortly, by the technological innovations that are taking place. So it enables essentially individual people to reach out and embrace individual local businesses, even be they in their neighborhood or even say maybe in another part of Thailand. So they can find exactly the right producer who's making exactly the right kind of product for them. And I think what this tells us is that there's really some rethinking needed by kind of both global and local brands around this. Of course, a lot of brands have generated goodwill during the crisis, so they really have I think a very strong legacy to build on to help them kind of develop a more resilient businesses going forward. Global brands face some different issues, and there was already kind of I think a trend towards local brands becoming stronger around the world, just because the economies of scale, the economies of mass marketing are no longer as important as they were, or no longer bring such an advantage as they used to. So global brands are starting to really think about how they need to better customize their offerings, make their messages more relevant to local markets and local cultures. And I think local brands, though, have a big opportunity now to really strengthen local ties and become a much more integrated part of the communities where they're based. Which kind of moves me to the next topic, so the thinking more now about customer experience and how that's changing. I think there's now obviously that the technology is allowing a much greater degree of personalization of experiences based often on the data that brands have about us and the things that we like. But that's kind of counterbalanced against this sort of issues of data privacy. And those have been, I think, really brought to the fore in Thailand by the Thai China initiative, which I'm sure you're all aware of. The government obviously is really wants people to use this platform and the app, because they insist it's sort of helping them to track and trace the sort of progress, or hopefully the non-progress of COVID-19, and is helping them to protect the health and safety and lives of people. Now, that's great, and obviously a lot of other countries have implemented similar systems. But in a lot of those other countries, there are also existing kind of data privacy regulations. So there's already an environment where people's data is protected. In Thailand, that's not true yet, and the introduction of PDPA has been delayed. So it makes some of these kind of issues of the trade-off between privacy and customization much more important. And those kind of concerns, I think, have been highlighted and amplified by some of the stories that people have been reading about sort of fake websites and fake apps and so on. And although Thais, and I'll show you some data in the next slide, are generally quite trusting, the evidence seems to be from what I've been able to find out about the take up of the Thai China is that a lot of people are kind of a little bit skeptical. About sort of the safety of sharing their information, but also just the sort of necessity to do it. So there sort of seems to be a bit of a gap between the government's ambition and the reality of what people are actually doing on the ground. And just to point to the data, and this is a study from 3 years ago from Kantar, where they asked a question about what concerns people have about personal data that brands had about them. And in Thailand, the concerns were very low at around 20%, which is about half of the global average. But I wonder if that might be changing now when those concerns that they might have are much more visible than they used to be. And the skepticism that people have about this sort of track and trace suggests that at least a lot of people have some concerns about this. And I think therefore the sort of takeout for brands is clearly there are opportunities in the ability to use data to really personalize experiences and give customers a better and a more relevant experience. But the counter side is that there are huge risks for brands. Of course, if they abuse that trust, but also when they're just not transparent about what they're doing. And of course, in the case of the track and trace, it's not the government, it's the local businesses that are actually the ones that are responsible for recording this data, and therefore ultimately are going to be the ones responsible if anything goes wrong with that system. So the imperative for brands, I think, is that they really need to think through what data they need from customers to make those experiences better, and how and why they're going to use that data to improve their experience. So focus not on what data they can get, but rather how they can use data to build trust with their customers. And with that, let me hand back to Craig.
Thanks very much, Neil. So our final theme that we've got to share with you today is about digitalization. And, you know, I think in Thailand and around the world, it's been very obvious that we've been using our digital devices to buy things online during lockdown. I don't think there's any dispute over that. There's strong data to support it. But the question remains, does this represent an acceleration of all things digital, or will we just go back to normal? And I think there's a I would say an emerging consensus now that suggests we are going through an acceleration. Certainly McKinsey have said that what we're experiencing now is like we vaulted 5 years forward in terms of digital adoption in a time frame of about 2 months. And certainly digital advertising data is also on an upward trend as well. And we would broadly support that view that we are going through a period of digital acceleration. Now, those that argue that we will return back to normal as soon as we come out of lockdown, there is a counter argument to that, of course, which is we are not going back to a pre-COVID world. There's no immediate return to normal. So if we think about our experiences in Thailand, we were out of lockdown some time ago. We can now go to department stores and retailers free to go. But is the experience really the same? I think when we go to a supermarket these days or any store, we're constantly reminded of the threat of COVID. We have our temperatures taken. We have the Thai China app that we're asked to fill in. We're asked to keep our distance from others in store. So, I think we with those constant reminders, that in some people can promote anxiety, and really, have we got the same sort of carefree, leisure-based experience that we had pre-COVID? Possibly not. But it's not really just about people and their habits. It's also about what businesses have been doing. Now, obviously, when we went into lockdown around the world, businesses were forced to innovate. And they've done so with great speed. A lot of investment that's gone into innovation, offering virtual showrooms, virtual stores, and many other things to keep their businesses going. But this investment is not just about continuity. It's about being future-proof to make sure if we face any other crises or pandemics in future, that businesses can continue to operate, not just continue, but operate efficiently and at low cost. So I think a lot of businesses are looking at their fixed cost assets now and seeing what's possible to reduce. And this investment, as much as the consumer side of things, is what's pushing the acceleration. The one interesting area to look at as an example is online marketplaces. And I use this as an example because we need to remember about the multiple need states that we're meeting when we're shopping. And it's interesting to see how the online marketplaces are trying to replicate some of the sense of fun, discovery, and adventure that we have when we go shopping. So there's a lot of gamification built into now if you go to Lazada or Shopee to try to replicate that sense of fun. But can we really replicate our traditional shopping to the same extent? If we think about, Thailand has got so many different retail formats that meet a huge variety of needs. The needs to escape, the needs for leisure, for entertainment, for relaxation. And of course, shopping is fundamentally a social need. Particularly in Thailand, we go with our family and friends, and we want to connect to the sellers as well. So really, can digital experiences ever replicate many of these needs? Probably not. So while the digital experiences can gain a foothold into competing with traditional experiences, it can never fully replicate what happens in a variety of stores we go to. What does this mean? Well, I think as more people do have digital experiences that are good, this will change the way that people experience your brand. And if you're managing the brand, you need to be aware of this and manage it accordingly. Digital experiences are getting better, but as I mentioned, they can't really meet the full range of need states. So there'll always be a role for a variety of different retail formats, which will continue to prosper. And it's important to understand for each format what needs each format is delivering to, so that from the retail side, the best-in-class experiences can be delivered, and also from the brand side, making sure that your brand is adapted to that channel is meeting the need states of that channel. So hopefully you found those 7 themes interesting. Here's a reminder of the 7 themes that we covered. The message that we'd like to leave you with really is quite a simple one, that society and culture is always in flux. We know that. It's always changing. But sometimes events happen, pandemics happen, crises happen, things happen in history where the acceleration of change is really, really huge. And we feel this is a moment in time that led us want to do this work to make sense of some of the change. And at the end of the day, for brands to stay successful, they need to stay culturally relevant during periods of great change. So the work that we're doing, we're actually put together, we've created a website called Culture Kitchen, which is now live. Please go and have a look. We will continue to update resources on there, and there will be a book around these themes which will go into more detail, which will be available through the website as well. together with various tools about how we can help you if you need help with your brand. So please reach out if you'd like us to help you with any issues or explain more any of the themes in detail. Please have a look at our website. Also, for agencies listening, we'd love to collaborate with with more people on this. So if you're interested in finding out more about this or working with us, please let us know. And with that, I will hand over to Grant, who I think hopefully has time to take some questions.